welcome to the September 14th Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission regular meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner DeVrent. Could Recording Secretary please call the roll? Here.
Here.
Here. Here.
Tonight's meeting is live streamed on Cable Channel 3 and our online platforms. To prevent any overlaps in comments, each commissioner will be called upon to speak, and we'll begin with public comment. This is the time set aside for members of the public to address the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission on items of interest that are not on the agenda, but are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission. Pursuant to the Brown Act, the Commission cannot answer any questions or take any action until such time as the matter may appear as an item on a future agenda. If you wish to address the Commission, please fill out a speaker card that's available on the back table. Once completed, kindly submit the card to the recording secretary. Speakers will be called to the podium one by one. Each speaker will be given up to 3 minutes to speak. Have we received any public comments?
We have not received any public comment for this section.
All right, thank you. Then we'll go on to the second item, which is review of the land acknowledgement statement. And I believe we have a presentation from Matthew Morales-Stevens.
All right, thank you, Chair Lubsich and members of the Historical Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission. Oof, I'm glad I actually got it this time. You guys have quite the handful there. I'm the Community Services Manager. I also oversee the HERE Commission and the Land Acknowledgement Statement Advisory Committee. As the main task of the Land Acknowledgement Statement Advisory Committee was to create and develop the Land Acknowledgement Statement for approval by the tribal leaders, the two commissions, and the council. The advisory committee is developed of 2 members from each commission, so two from the HPCRC and 2 from the HERE Commission to help develop the statement. So as you can imagine, it's quite the task to develop something that fits the needs of all members involved, and creating something that neither offends as well as pays respects to those that are most important. So with that said, at the October 6th, 2021 advisory committee meeting, they developed a purpose statement to help guide the discussion. So that reads as follows: the land acknowledgement statement serves as a clear and ongoing commitment from the City of San Gabriel to respect and acknowledge the Native peoples of San Gabriel for their past, current, and future contributions to the region. After that, the advisory committee went on to have several discussions with the tribal leaders to ensure that they were properly represented in the process and to have a better idea of exactly how the statement should be developed. At the August 11th advisory committee meeting, the advisory committee approved the statement as well as proposed uses. Following that, the August 23rd HERE Commission meeting, the Commission approved the statement as well as the proposed uses with the amendment that a smaller statement be added for the purposes of meetings and special events. So the Commission felt that it was too long of a statement to be read at meetings and special events, that it may go above and beyond what people are willing to absorb within that time frame. Let me go back. So the statement that was approved by the advisory committee and the commission reads as follows. The city of San Gabriel resides on the lands of the unceded village of Sibagna and acknowledges that the ancestors of this village and many others were collectivized at the San Gabriel Mission. The city respectfully recognizes its responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, who remain an important and vibrant community. The city strives to respect and honor the ancestral people's legacy and educate residents of this history. The possible uses are as follows: post on the city website, read aloud at city meetings and functions, post at the front of the Mission Playhouse and or City Hall, a map of the indigenous villages with the statement. So to clarify on that, it would be working with the tribal leaders to create that map. If there's one that's already if there's already one that exists, then making that larger and more visible for the public as they walk into one of those locations within the city, with the statement somewhere affixed next to that. Recommend that the San Gabriel Unified School District use the statement at events and include it in the California history class curriculum. And finally, initiation of education and outreach. So really what that is to get the ball rolling with the education and outreach. Since that's not within the purview of the advisory committee, it's put back on the city to continue that process beyond what the advisory committee was set out to do. So with that said, staff is recommending that the commission either approves the statement along with the uses, as well as including the HERE Commission's recommendation, all in one foul swoop, or you can take that into bits and pieces and add items on to the proposed uses. You can make amendments to the statement, or you can, disagree with the HERE Commission and say that you don't think that it's necessary to have a smaller statement, and that full statement suffices for all and any and all purposes. So really the onus goes back onto the commission tonight to determine what that would look like. Anything that happens from tonight, since the HERE Commission has already put in their recommendation that a smaller statement needs to be created, we'll go back to the Land Acknowledgement Statement Advisory Committee. From there, what we've decided, assuming that there's not any major changes, it will go back to the tribal leaders once that smaller statement, if that's the direction that the commission tonight wants to go as well, a smaller statement will be developed for presentation to the tribal leaders along with everything else that we're presenting tonight. Then back to the two commissions again, and then finally landing out at the city council. So I know it's quite the process, so I apologize, but you'll see what we're going through all of those steps to make sure that everyone has equal access to this and has their voice heard throughout the process before that's set in stone. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. So I'll start with Commissioner DeVrent. Any questions or comments?
No, I would agree with the HERE Commission's recommendation of a smaller, concise version of this for grade schools or the high schools. But then I guess that begs the question of, would a more concise, simplified version just be needed all around? And I just think about reading it on paper is one thing. To see something like unceded or collectivized, right? They're the two words that stick out to me as far as those being appropriate here when it's being read, but when you're reading it on paper, but when it's being said out loud at events and everything like that, what do those words really mean? So my thought would be a more simplified version, for sure, but I see cases for both, where I could see this being the statement as it stands now on city buildings and things of that nature, right? But when it is to reading it, or even, just to take it back a little bit more, and in the curriculum too, I think this is great for reading this to students so that they understand what those words mean. What does unceded mean? Really, what does that mean? And what does collectivized mean in this context? So in those purposes, I think this is great. But I do believe that when reading it to keep the audience's to understand what that really means when you're at a football game and you're announcing this sort of thing, or when you're reading this off. It'd be great to understand what we're really talking about. So that was my only comment on this. So that's it. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Arenas, any questions or comments?
No questions. I kind of agree with Commissioner. I guess the length of it for me wasn't so much of the problem, just maybe the language. Like if it is going to be read to grade school children, my son, being 9 years old, might have a difficult time really paying attention to this. But high school and other events, I don't see it as much as a problem. But that's the only input that I would have. Maybe just change a word or two.
Mm-hmm.
But I really didn't have a problem with the length of it at all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then Vice Chair Maharo.
I believe the length, obviously, it would be very nice if we could shorten it. However, what's actually said in this statement is very important. I think it's very hard to try to condense it and not leave something out. Other than the vocabulary used, and we were very careful as being part of that committee to choose wisely. However, I don't think I would change it. I would accept this as the statement. I think it covers pretty much what we as a committee had wanted to state, and it really brings to light the history of our city in a short paragraph. Thanks.
My question, I know that at the HEAR Commission they proposed some changes in terms of the language they would take out. Is that something that can be read to us here in this meeting? I listened to the meeting and I'm aware of what they proposed, but I didn't know if we were supposed to sort of work blindly as our own commission and see where the two groups meet or diverge.
Yeah, so I unfortunately don't have that with me tonight as far as what their kind of cuts were on that. We're likely going to be leaving that back up to the advisory committee to determine what exactly, but if there is anything that is strongly should be removed from the statement or should be removed to create a shorter statement, then we can definitely bring that back to the committee. It was my understanding that what the HEAR Commission was putting forth wasn't as much as things that have to be removed from the larger statement, but could be used for a smaller statement.
In terms of the comments from my fellow commissioners, I'm getting dinged for my own vocabulary in this because unceded and collectivized were terms that I had pushed. Unceded just really as a reference to there was no formal treaty or giving of the land, that in the eyes of the ancestors, this is still their village and their land, and it belongs to them. But also the fact that the mission had two places, and you had a rather significant process of collectivizing multiple villages and peoples in San Gabriel through the history of the mission. And I certainly agree, in a grade school setting, those are really hard words to wrap their heads around. They are hard words to wrap your head around, I think, for most people. It takes a piece of education, which is certainly part of what this statement is meant to do that educational piece. I know that that was one of the areas that was dropped, just bringing things down more to keeping a focus on the village of Sibagna, which was a point of consensus when we spoke with the tribal elders in terms of recognizing the land, that Sibagna is the village that was here. And so we felt very comfortable invoking the name of that village. Another thing that was important to me in the discussions was not to talk about our first peoples in the past tense as though they are not here or a part of the community. And so recognizing the resilience and persistence of the first peoples was important. So I think just in terms of what I felt was important to communicate in this, were some of those elements, that this was unceded territory, that you are bringing together people from a range of villages in San Gabriel because of the presence of the mission, and that they are still here and still vibrantly engaged, and that we need to partner with them in preserving their history. I don't know if we want to try to wordsmith or just give the recommendation and send it back to the Land Acknowledgement Advisory Committee, that we need to shorten it down and let the work happen there. If any of you have recommendations on what you would condense, I'm happy to make note.
No, I agree with the wordings, and I think I'm more it's a jumping off point. It's part of the curriculum to teach what those words mean. I think was more about what I was trying to get at. I don't think changing them, if it changes the context of the statement, is I don't think that's it. I was just thinking of a third grader or a fifth grader, who's having this read to them. But I completely agree with you that if a teacher if it's part of the curriculum, is reading this and then explains what those words are, I think that's the that would be the way to go. So I don't think that it necessarily. That was my only concern with it. But I think that as you pointed out, if this is a leaping off from my teaching moment, then of course I think that's what's important. So. That was my own. I kind of like this weekend, and when I was reading it, thinking, well, what could you change those words to? And I don't really think there is anything that you could. I think they are, like you said, they're all carefully thought out. So that was it. I mean, I kind of was opening it up for a discussion, maybe, and I think that how you explained that was really good. So
I think it's an important discussion to have here in this commission. I don't know, Commissioner Urena, if there's, as we're sort of building this, if there's other thoughts, or Vice Chair Moharo, having been part of the process.
I don't have any comments. I think the words, and I agree with you that it's to a third, fourth grader. It's probably a little more complicated, but once they're educated on the meaning of these words, can you imagine a third, fourth grader coming home and using those words, right? It's just part of the learning process, and I think that's the whole point of our statement to begin with.
So it sounds a little bit to me like the recommendation is to bring this back to the Land Acknowledgement Statement Advisory Committee, to keep in mind the range of audience, maybe see if we can make it a little bit stronger on the educational side. Are there any recommendations in terms of possible uses that you would add to the list that's been compiled?
I think all the uses, from my point of view, are exactly where they would want to, where we want those to land. I guess my hope is that when it's in the curriculum of the schools, both here in San Gabriel, that there is an emphasis on teaching what this really means, what those words mean, and how they apply in a historical context, for sure. So that would be my only no changes on it, but that in the curriculum part, that there is an effort to explain this to whoever it is, so they understand what those words really mean. But
I think the one recommendation I would make is on the point of the map of the indigenous villages to accompany the statement, that I'd like to see that used a little bit more broadly, maybe in the planning department, just as a way to educate when we're picking names for places, which is sort of an apt point of discussion given the agenda this evening. I think one of the things that strikes me is how many villages are known, but we choose a more simple route of the collectivized terms when referring to the First Peoples. And I think there's a big piece that we can do in our commission of giving name and speaking those villages that we know to have been extant at the time of the Spanish conquest. And so I think that that's an important piece of that we really actively work when possible to speak to those geographical features or locations that have been called out in mapping. So I guess not a map that just goes along with the statement, but one that actually lives in in the departments of the city. So, do you need a vote in terms of action on this item?
Just for clarity, I would typically ask for a motion to be made, just to be sure everyone's on the same page and in agreement with that.
Okay. Before we do that, have there been any public comments submitted for this item?
No, Chair. There have not been any public comments for this section.
All right, then it is now 6:50 and the time for public comment on this item is closed. Would one of my fellow commissioners be willing to make a motion to send this back to the Land Acknowledgement Statement Advisory Committee to work on a more perhaps condensed or education-minded statement?
And for clarity purposes, would the shorter statement be in addition to the one that was proposed or in place of?
I think it's, in my opinion, would be better to just shorten one statement, not to have multiple versions. I think that leads to complications.
Okay, great.
So a shortened, more condensed form.
I guess if this is, in reading this, if a short and condensed version is not something that, if it does take the emphasis and the power away from what the statement says, I don't know if I would necessarily want that to be the case. So I want to be clear of what we're, if we're proposing that it stands as it is, and that would be kind of my recommendation after hearing the comments from my fellow commissioners here. So that's what I would say. I guess if the emphasis is more on the making sure that this is taught in schools in a proper way to understand what these words mean, then I would be good with what's presented here, without having to go through that step to make it clear.
I think I have my college statement word count eyes on this, and I'm thinking we can shorten this up. We can tighten up this statement a bit. So just in looking at what I have on paper, if we wanted to try to bring it into a more condensed form, I think we could, the city of San Gabriel resides on the lands of the unceded village of Sabagna, acknowledging the ancestors of this village and those collectivized at the San Gabriel mission. The city recognizes its responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land and strives to respect and honor the enduring legacy of this vibrant community and educate residents of this history.
Yeah.
I think we can tackle it that way. Shorten it up a little bit. All right. So I have that marked up on my page here. I can.
I'll listen back to the minutes too, so no problem. We are,
You know,
I'm pretty good, but not that good.
Yeah. I know we've thrown you some curveballs through this process.
No problem.
All right. So if we can take maybe that proposal and then come back as the advisory committee and wordsmith it to a final.
Perfect.
Okay. So still a motion?
That would be great.
All right. So can I have a motion for what she said?
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So just to be clear, because that wasn't a very official call for a motion, Commissioner DeVrent is making a motion to forward a more condensed version of the proposed land acknowledgement statement back to the advisory committee for final editing. We're making the one change to possible uses to include indigenous villages or to use maps of indigenous villages to the way that they can be in the planning department, and then continue on with the process. So motion second?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Vote
Okay.
by,
Yeah, so roll call vote.
okay.
Okay, Chair Lubicic,
Aye.
Vice Chair Moharo,
Aye.
Commissioner DeVrent,
Aye.
and Commissioner Orenya.
Aye.
Okay, motion passed with the vote of 4-0.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, this takes us to the third item on the agenda, street name change guidelines. And Dr. Aldo will present.
Thank you, Chair, and members of the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resources Commission. It's a pleasure being here this evening. In regards to this item, staff is seeking comments and feedback from the Commission as it relates to a draft guidelines for the renaming of city streets in San Gabriel. This topic was presented to the City Council on May 3rd, 2022, in which direction was given to draft the attached guidelines and to solicit feedback and comments from this commission, as well as the next step would be Planning Commission and also the Hears Commission thereafter, and then we go back to the City Council for final decision. The draft guidelines were reviewed by the City Attorney's Office, as well as Public Works, the police and fire departments as well. Their comments have been incorporated into the draft, as well as any other specific standards that relates to those departments. The origins of this topic are presented on page 1 of the report, so I will not go through the background in this case, as that right now is irrelevant to this conversation or discussion. As stated, staff and the council are requesting the commission review the attached guidelines, application, as well as the proposed fee, and provide changes and feedback and comments. The information and or changes provided by this commission will be shared with the City Council at a later meeting. Before I conclude, I would like to make reference to section 4 of the guidelines, as this is the section that describes the process in selection of names. This section was somewhat inspired by the County of LA's policy for street names, as it relates to historic significance amongst the county, in this case, the city of San Gabriel. The other sections of the guidelines pertain to very standard public works requirements, as well as application procedures, and lastly, notification requirements. And so with that said, well, I'll also add in terms of the differences between this draft guideline and the county's policy is that I believe ours is a lot more robust than LA County's. LA County's makes reference to a historic standard for street naming. As you can see in our guidelines, we do dive in a little further with respect to policies and procedures. So I want to make that differentiating comment there. So with that said, staff recommends the commission discuss the matter and provide comments or changes to the guidelines, application, and fees. Before I conclude officially, I would like to thank some of the commissioners who I had conversations with during the past week. In full transparency, with respect to the fees, for example, if a private applicant or a resident requested a street name change, they'd be subject to paying the fees to offset the cost of city time. If the street name change was created or was provided by a council member or commissioner, whether planning commission or this commission, of course the city would offset the cost, and there wouldn't be a fee per se to that application. So also had a conversation with Commissioner Weeks. I know he's not here tonight, but I believe he provided his comments in writing to the commission, and so I'd like to also share that as well. So staff is seeking the comments and feedback of this commission, and we will then take that information back to the City Council for final decision. So I open for questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cervantes. I'll start again with you, Commissioner DeVrent.
Yeah, thank you for putting this together. And you know, I didn't have really any other questions. You know, based on the context of what kicked this off, as that was, you know, the one thing that I circled here is street names should not be given dated recognition of any living person, right? That was something. And as part of the historical commission too, I would wonder if a street name was in, you know, somebody of a historical background having a street name like that would be brought to a commission such as this, right?
Absolutely.
And kind of the age that we're living in right now with removals of certain street names or things like that because of the historical significance, or it may have, you know, derogatory, you know, that's derogatory implications, things of that nature. It's called out in this as well. So I guess you know, so that is great. The only question I have is like, and this is what the fees, you know, for that, do those fees, and I guess because I don't have a lot of knowledge about this, but I think you name a street, there's a lot that has to go, or you rename a street, a lot that goes into maps. You know, how does that fee apply to that? I mean, how do first responders, you know, do their maps get updated? You know, and does that fee cover that? You know, all of those logistics, I guess, would be my only question on that.
Yeah, the fee is, and we'll discuss this with the council a little further, but the fee that we've described in the report was presented to council as well, and that's intended to cover the cost of materials and supplies. So, of course, the material would be the actual sign itself on the street. The $1,000 deposit is intended to cover the cost of, for example, changing maps or updating maps. It is going to be the responsibility of the applicant to discuss the change of the name with other agencies, for example, county or whoever may be related to this process. In speaking to the Public Works Department, they feel that this fee is enough to cover the cost for a majority of their work.
All right, thank you. That's it for me.
Commissioner Urena?
Yeah, I really didn't have any comments. My only questions were the fees, but as he clarified, I guess it would cover. I was under the impression it'd be a lot more than that to go to the extent of, you know, postal service and everything else. But if they feel that that's a proper price point, then I guess I don't have a problem.
Thank you. Vice Chair Mahara?
So in regards to historical or personal significance for street naming, it would come to our commission then to determine if it would be considered historical, correct?
I believe, given that we're in this process now as it relates to this topic, I would go as far as saying that the council would very much see a process that includes this commission before it ends up with the city council for a final vote.
Okay.
So yes, I would say that would be a part of the process and can be.
Okay, because I was looking at the example that was given, and obviously, just for perspective, you see you have an applicant that comes and wants this name change, yet what we had just finished discussing, there is no acknowledgement for, you know, the indigenous natives of this area that have been here for hundreds of years. So I think this is very important. It's great that the city is putting it out, and it is in writing, and it's very structured. And I'm okay with the fees. I think it's if someone thinks it's too expensive, it could be a deterrent. I don't know. You can't. And again, I'll go back to that example that was given. You know, that to me was a marketing strategy, really, a good one.
Right.
But nevertheless, from the perspective of a commission such as ours, you question that. So I think laying it out here, determining that, okay, it's what is considered historical. I know for us as a commission, it's been stated 50 years or older, right? There aren't any of those guidelines here, so I don't know if that's something that's why I asked. Does it come to the commission? Does the city council decide that? Or
Well, to answer the question, the two questions there, if the commission would like to see a standard for, let's say, a 50-year standard, we can certainly add that into these guidelines. One of the things that was very clear with the council is that they did not want to see a formal policy for determining this process. They wanted rather to see guidelines to help essentially guide an applicant as to how to start, how to move through the process, that sort of thing. If the commission would like to see more standards added to this, for example, under Section 4, if the commission would like to see an indigenous sort of section, I guess, of Section 4, we can add that in here and take to the council for their final consideration. So if by example, if a hierarchy of the naming of the street starts with indigenous criteria, then we can look to add it if this is what the commission would like to see.
All right.
thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah. I do appreciate how robust Section 4 is in terms of the guidelines. There are a couple things that I think we ought to be careful of, and one is something that Commissioner DeVrent raised. contexts change. People that are favored in one period may find themselves being regarded differently by another generation. And I think in general, acknowledgement or recognition of individuals has come to be seen as sort of fraught territory. So if it's possible to have a hierarchy, I would certainly favor the geographical leading that, and it can certainly be the historic geography or landscapes, the cultural landscapes of San Gabriel. I also think it might be wise to give some thought to what constitutes a legacy business, and the LA Conservancy might be helpful. They've done a lot of work in terms of defining legacy businesses. My thought immediately went to the Yoshimura family and the nursery, to Claro's, even Whammo. I was kind of joking with my family. We could have Whammo Way, that you have these businesses that have had a very clear and lasting impact on the culture, not just of San Gabriel, but of the region. And it seems that creating some sort of standard that incorporates the idea of a legacy business as opposed to just businesses might be a valuable addition to this section. And as far as the fees go, I might still be smacking a little bit from the discussion around Mills Act fees, that you have similar interests at play, I think, in terms of designating a place, but the burden put on residents for a Mills Act application seems so much greater than this, and the wayfinding and process of renaming a street, of building that into the city's culture seems pretty arduous. So I think I would prefer to see a fee that really gave pause and made applicants think about the significance of the renaming, in much the way we're requiring residents to really think about their Mills Act application in a financial sense. At this time, have there been any public comments?
Yes, Chair. This is just the public comment from Commissioner Weeks, and it reads as follows. The proposed name change from West Bend Camp to Hing Hua Li Place is unacceptable to me for a number of reasons. Number one, should the existing business Hing Hua Li Jewelers someday vacate the location, the city is left with a totally out of context street name. Number two, I would suggest that the installation of a new signage name intended to provide free locational advertising for the applicant at city expense. Number three, per item 4.1, guidelines and selection of names, the proposed name does not consider San Gabriel's civic identity, nor does it follow any of the guidelines noted in the attachment. Number four is the final filing fee. I would maintain that the filing fee be in accordance with what is being proposed for the Mills Act, filing fee of $5,000 and deposit of the same amount. Thank you.
If there are no further public comments, the time for public comment will close at 7:08. Are there any other comments from my fellow commissioners? I would just say I think we want to be very careful with the phrase civic identity. That, too, is a pretty fraught term. I think a lot of people will automatically go to a Spanish fantasy past, which excludes large populations in our community. And so that's a phrase, hearing it read, that makes me think we should be very careful or define it a little bit more clearly. Okay. Anything further? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
It was just for feedback. Do you need a motion?
No motion, just we'll receive and file. We take the comments back and go back to the Planning Commission, Hearings Commission, and then Council.
Great, thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, so that brings us to the fourth agenda item, Historic Resources Survey Update. We get Andrew Goodrich, I think, coming to do this.
Good evening, everyone. Chair Lubasich, members of the commission. My name is Andrew Goodrich. I'm with Architectural Resources Group, ARG. I'm very pleased to be here this evening. I know that most of us have met before, but through Zoom. So it's really great to have a chance to finally meet in person after 2+ years of pandemic restrictions. So our firm ARG is working on the San Gabriel Citywide Historic Resources Survey, which we are very excited to be working on. I've prepared just a brief slide presentation for you all tonight, which is up on the screen. And really the purpose of tonight's presentation is to kind of reintroduce ourselves at ARG, and then provide you all with an update, project update, and what we've been working on so far. Next slide, please. Or do I have a, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm in control, never mind. Maybe I'm in control. No, it's great, thank you. Okay. Okay, so this is just a quick overview of what I'm hoping to convey to you all tonight. So as I mentioned, I'll just begin with a quick kind of reintroduction of our consultant team. From there, I'll provide a summary of what we've been working on so far. Then I'll provide an overview of what our next steps look like, and then and we'll wrap it all up, and I'll be available to answer any questions that you have for our team. Next slide, please. So again, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with our team from the historic context statement that was prepared a couple years back. But for anyone who may be tuning in to this meeting for the first time, we just wanted to take a few minutes to reintroduce ourselves. Next slide. So as I mentioned, I'm here with Architectural Resources Group. We go by ARG for short. We are a historic preservation consulting firm with offices in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Portland. Our staff consists of architects, historians, planners, and conservators. We all come from different backgrounds. We all have different areas of expertise, but we are all united in that we have a passion for the historic built environment. So this is the team that we've assembled for the San Gabriel survey. So I'm Andrew. I'm the project manager from ARG. Also on our team are my colleagues Katie Horak, pictured on the left. She is the principal in charge, as well as Alicia Palachek. And Alicia will be assisting with the field survey and with research tasks. The three of us, Katie, Alicia, myself, will be working on this project from start to finish. Next slide. Oh, okay. Excellent. Thank you. So historic resource surveys are a big part of what we do at ARG. Listed here are just a couple of the survey projects that we've completed in recent years. For almost 10 years or so, which was a very long time, we worked on Survey LA, which was the kind of pioneering citywide survey of Los Angeles. We've also conducted surveys for the cities of Santa Monica, Dana Point, and Tustin, and then a little closer to home for San Marino, Arcadia, and La Cañada Flint Ridge. Of course, we've also have experience working in San Gabriel from the San Gabriel Citywide Historic Context Statement that was prepared in 2020 and adopted in 2021. The context statement is really, it's kind of the preamble, if you will, to the citywide survey. It established a framework for evaluating culturally and historically significant properties within the city. So we will be relying very heavily on this document as we move forward with the survey. So next, I'll just provide a quick overview of the project, specifically what we hope to accomplish and what we've been up to for the last few months. So this will be a comprehensive historic resources survey of the entire city of San Gabriel. We will be looking at all properties within the city limits that were constructed up through the year 1980. As noted earlier, this is the first time that the city has ever completed a citywide survey. There have been some limited survey efforts in the past, but they've really, they focused on specific areas or neighborhoods and were limited in scope. By contrast, this project is intended to be comprehensive and citywide. The focus of the survey will be on above ground built resources. These are things like buildings and landscapes and infrastructure and signs and historic districts. We do know that, you know, there are a lot of archaeological resources in the city. Generally speaking, the scope of this project will focus on above ground built resources and not on archaeological resources. So the survey has been divided into 2 phases, and this is really because of funding and budget. So when we were reviewing the RFP that came out earlier this year, one of the things that kind of our team at ARG kind of observed was we just didn't feel there was enough budget at this time to do everything all at once without compromising the quality of our work. And so we worked with city staff, Sam and her team, to kind of phase the survey in a way that would give the city the most bang for its buck, if you will. Phase 1 is what we're working on right now. This includes background review and outreach, a reconnaissance survey of the entire city, and an intensive level survey of individually eligible properties and what we call non-parcel resources. These are things like landscapes, bridges, street lights, signs, that type of thing. Phase 1 also includes a preliminary evaluation of historic districts. We will identify where potential districts are and what the boundaries of each district are. And we will also evaluate the eligibility of each district. And the goal is really to provide the city with enough baseline information to understand where districts are and why they are significant. We will not be identifying contributors and non-contributors within districts as part of phase 1. This will come at a later date during phase 2, which will take place when there is funding to do so. This is the project schedule for phase 1. It kicked off in the spring, in April, and will take about a year to complete. So we're kind of at the midway point or so now. I'm just going to take the next few minutes to go through each of the milestones listed here. So kind of what we've been up to the past few months is kind of behind the scenes stuff. We've been busily working on reviewing anything and everything we can find about historic resources in the city of San Gabriel. So this includes planning documents like the ordinance that was updated back in 2017, previous surveys that have been completed, as well as the historic context statement that was published back in 2021. Early on, we also worked with staff to develop a public outreach program. We really value the input and participation of the community. The residents and the stakeholders of San Gabriel, they know this city much better than we do. So it's really beneficial for us to engage community members early on in the process and speak with them directly to learn about the places in the city that matter to them. One of the specific things that we did toward this end was we developed content for a dedicated project webpage, similar to what was done for the historic context statement. So ARG is responsible for developing the content for the webpage and updating it over time. The city is responsible for hosting the page on the City of San Gabriel's official website. The webpage went live in May of this year. It will be live for the entire course of this project. It will be updated as things move forward, and it's really intended to be kind of a resource that is readily accessible to anyone and everyone who is interested in the project and learning more about what is going on. In addition to developing content for the webpage, our team at ARG developed a public comment form that people can use to submit information that they'd like to share with us. The form is available on the project webpage, and then we also make sure we bring hard copies of the form to meetings like the one tonight, as well as community workshops. I have some hard copies if there are people who would like to fill them out. You're welcome to do so. Our outreach program also involves 2 community workshops. The first workshop, was held in July of this year. It was held in person, which again was great. It was really wonderful to meet people in person. And we had several people attend, which was really wonderful. The workshop was, the content of that workshop was very introductory. We provided an overview of the project, an overview of what surveys are and how they're used. And we also had an informal kind of Q&A session, a discussion section at the end of that meeting. We will be hosting a second workshop. The date has not yet been set. It is tentatively scheduled for the fall. And we will, of course, be sure to spread the word with you all, with stakeholders, and with anyone else who is interested in attending when that date is settled. So just quickly pictured on the screen, these are just some snapshots of the public comment form that I was talking about. It's a pretty simple one-page document with some kind of general guiding questions just to kind of get the conversation started. We didn't want this to be intimidating or onerous for anyone to complete. We want this to be as user-friendly as possible. So we try to, our best to keep it short and sweet and to the point. The form is available in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Chinese. We recognize and appreciate that San Gabriel is a diverse community, and we want to be sure that we are reaching as many people as we possibly can through our outreach efforts. If someone chooses to complete a form, they can submit it to staff, who will then pass it along to us. So that's kind of the channel of communication that we've established. Instructions on how to submit the form are located on the backside of the form. In August, so last month, we conducted a reconnaissance survey of the city. Our team at ARG spent 2 days driving every street in San Gabriel. We looked at every property that we could see from the public right-of-way. And this really helped us understand broad development patterns in the city and kind of gave us a lay of the land, so to speak. During the reconnaissance survey, we took notes about particular buildings and neighborhoods and other resources that caught our attention and that we believed merited additional research moving forward. So what we're currently doing is we are compiling our observations from the reconnaissance survey into a list of potentially eligible properties and potentially eligible historic districts. We should have a draft of that list available sometime within the next couple of weeks, at which time we will be sending it over to staff for review and comment. So that's kind of in a nutshell, that's where we are right now. So now I just wanted to spend a few minutes walking you through the next steps in our process and kind of outlining the tasks that we'll be working on over the next several months. So once again, here's the project schedule. The red arrow at the bottom shows approximately where we are now. So as you can see, we're roughly at about the midpoint. We'll be out in the field later on this year in the fall. Early next year, in 2023, we'll be working on packaging everything into a survey report. And then everything should be wrapped up by the spring of 2023. As I mentioned, we're currently working on putting together that list of potentially eligible properties, districts, and other types of resources. At the moment, we're conducting some kind of very specific property-based research into the potential individual properties, potential districts that we identified during the reconnaissance survey. And in the coming weeks, we'll also be working with staff to schedule a second community workshop for the fall. Oh, and just one more note on that second workshop. The purpose will be to provide an update, kind of keep everyone up to speed on what we've been doing. And we also want to give stakeholders another opportunity to share information with us and ask any questions that they have about the project. It'll also be an opportunity for us to share the findings from our reconnaissance survey and get some input on that. So once the list of eligible resources is finalized, we will move on to the next step in the process, which is an intensive level survey. So just to kind of distinguish between the reconnaissance and the intensive surveys, the purpose of the reconnaissance survey is to kind of preliminarily identify which resources appear to be eligible. The purpose of the intensive survey is to go back out and document resources that are eligible. During the intensive survey, we collect data about each eligible resource. This includes things like architectural style, a physical description, character-defining features, and any alterations that we're able to make note of. So back in the olden days, we used to record all of our information on paper sheets. So we'd be lugging around binders full of documents and forms. It was very arduous. Luckily, those days are behind us. And now we collect survey data using an app on our mobile phones, which is much easier for us as practitioners, and also helps to streamline the data collection process to make sure that all properties are being evaluated consistently. And then I always like to emphasize that the survey work that we do is all completed from the public right-of-way. We won't need to access private property at all, and we will not need to go inside of any buildings. We're just going to be documenting what we're able to see from public view. There may be a couple of instances in which we need to coordinate access to a property. We'll be working with staff to do that if that's the case. But generally speaking, everything we do is from the public right-of-way. So in addition to collecting data about a property, we'll also be evaluating its historical or cultural significance. To guide this process, we'll be relying pretty heavily on the information that is included in the historic context statement. That document includes information about context and themes, integrity considerations, and registration requirements that will be applied to properties identified in the field. And then the final step will be to kind of package everything into a survey report. The report will include a summary of our methodology and kind of a list of our survey findings. In addition, each eligible resource will be documented on standardized inventory forms. In the field, we call these DPR forms, which will be included as an appendix to the survey report. I know I keep kind of mentioning this, but I really do want to emphasize that public participation is very important to the success of the project. We really encourage anyone who's interested in the history of San Gabriel and in the architectural, cultural history of the community to participate if they would like to. We really just want to be sure that this survey captures the buildings and neighborhoods and places that matter to the community and really make it special for what it is. Toward that end, there are a number of different ways in which community members can participate. As I mentioned, we are hosting 2 community meetings. The first one was held in July. The second will be held in the fall, and we'll certainly share information about the logistics of that as it becomes available. The public is also invited to attend the HPCRC meetings like the one tonight. We'll be presenting you all with regular updates as the project moves forward, and everyone is invited to tune in and submit comments if they would like to. As I mentioned before, the public comment card is available on the project webpage. It can be filled out and returned to staff if there is a particular building or neighborhood or other resource that our team should be made aware of. We'll take a very close look at every form, every entry that is submitted to us, and we will be evaluating these properties against professional standards to determine if they meet eligibility criteria. And then once again, the project webpage is a really great way to stay up to date about where things are in the process. The link is included at the bottom of the screen in red, and I'm just going to read it out loud real quick. That link is www.sangabrielcity.com/1621/historic-resources-survey. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for your time this evening. It's really great to be back. It's really great to meet you all in person. And I am available to answer any questions that you have. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Any questions from you, Commissioner DeVrent, or comments?
Yeah, just a couple. As far as your survey, how micro do you get? Like when you look at a neighborhood in a district, do you literally do every house that's in San Gabriel, or do you kind of research if you find a house that has a historical value, that's the one that gets acknowledged or registered in your findings, or how does that work?
There's kind of 2 parallel processes that are going on. So the first has to do with historic districts. For districts, the level of documentation relating to kind of individual, it's more about the district as a whole, and less about at least at this point in the process, in this phase 1 survey, less about the individual properties within the boundaries. It's more about the collective. And then we'll also be looking at kind of properties that stand out on their own individually for a variety of reasons. For those properties, we'll be doing a deeper dive into kind of the specifics of that property, what the architectural features are, what the alterations are, who the architect and builder were, if we know that information, that kind of thing. If that answers
Okay,
your
thank you.
question.
That answers my question.
Commissioner Orena, any questions or comments?
No question or comments, but thank you for the presentation. It was nice. Thank you.
Esther Maharo.
Yes, I was actually at that workshop, and that open session at the end was great. I think we all left motivated and encouraged to drive around the city and see what we have, and there's so many gems really in this city. I took it back to my own neighborhood, to my neighbors on my street, and they were very receptive. They had ideas. Of course, they didn't bother to come, but they wanted me to report back to them. So there's a block party at the end of the month. So I would like to take some forms if you have some extra forms with you. Now, how do we submit online? Because I actually have a couple of forms filled out already. They're electronic. Is there instructions on the site? I haven't gone back.
Yes, there should be instructions on the rear side of the form.
On the physical copy?
Yeah, and on the online copy too, I believe there are instructions, but they can be emailed to Sam. Um, is that correct, Sam? Am I putting words in your mouth?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the commission. If not directly to staff, the department has a general email, and that is comdevinfo@sgch.com. So that's COMMDEVINFO@sgch.com. Org. I'm sorry. ORG.
And I'll be happy to give you some copies of the form before heading out tonight.
You.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I had a couple questions. I've received questions also from neighbors who were very active when you did the historic context statement and compiled a pretty lengthy Excel spreadsheet and submitted it then, wondering if they needed to resubmit that or if it was carried over.
Everything we have is carried over. So we have all of the information that was provided during the context statement. We've actually been reviewing it, and it's really helped inform our work, which has been great.
Okay.
So no need to resubmit. If there's additional information, that's kind of new, we're always happy to receive it.
Okay. Then my other question really had to do with sort of the observations of the broader patterns that your team is seeing, particularly with the continuity between the context statement and now the survey. Are you seeing anything as you're driving and doing the reconnaissance that is different from the patterns that we were identifying in our context statement?
They're more or less the same. We did a reconnaissance survey as well for the context statement. It was we were focused more on it was a very, very big picture kind of analysis that we were doing then. Now we're focused a little bit more on specific neighborhood characteristics. I think generally speaking, there's a lot of continuity between the information in the historic context statement and what we've observed in our reconnaissance survey.
Okay, well that's nice to hear. Going from macro to micro and having it be consistent is good.
Yes.
The other, it's more a concern that I have as you're doing the different levels of survey is attention to the socioeconomic development over time in different areas of the city. I know that there's a pretty invested community in the area that they call the barrio who would really like to see it be a district. It certainly doesn't conform to the standards that we might expect to see in a district. It's much more diffused in terms of commercial developments that are sort of supplanted in with the residential areas. And so I guess it would just be my one comment to hopefully be very attentive to those patterns of development that speak to the cultures and socioeconomic status of our residents over time. It's very easy to look at, I call it Washington Square, the little commercial district next to Washington Elementary School, or certainly the Village has a very nice narrative that's part of its built environment. But I think there are areas in the city that are equally vibrant. They just developed according to the economics of the people who live there, and that's a very important story to tell. So sort of off the mainstream, I hope is getting some good attention too.
Yeah, no, we really appreciate that feedback, and that neighborhood, the barrio. I know when we were preparing the historic context statement, that was of particular importance to us, really because there are so many different facets of history that are represented there, some of which have not historically been represented adequately in the preservation field. So we'll be sure to be attentive.
Were there any public comments on this item?
There are no public comments for this item.
All right, so it is now 7:33. Time for public comment on this item is now closed. Are there any further comments from my fellow commissioners? Then thank you so much, Andrew, and congratulations on the Historic Context Award from
Thank
LA
you.
Conservancy.
Thank you very much.
Very exciting.
Thank you all.
Yeah. All right, that brings us to item 5, 607 West Roses Road presentation.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. So staff will give a brief introduction presentation for this item, and then we also have members of the applicant team here actually that will provide a more detailed presentation on this item. So the item before you tonight is for a proposed project that would entail a general plan amendment, a zone text amendment, a zone change, and a lot line adjustment for the address at 607 West Roses Road, planning case number GPA 21-001, and the applicant is the San Gabriel Cemetery. The project is located on the north side of West Roses Road between DeSale Street to the west and North Dobbins Drive to the east. The project is adjacent to the San Gabriel Cemetery property and has single-family homes located to the south. The slide above shows that the project is actually, it is zoned R1 for single-family residential and has a general plan land use designation of low density residential. As far as the project description, existing right now on the site is a 1,943 approximately square foot single family home that was built in 1931. There is also an attached garage to the single family home. The applicant is proposing to demolish the existing single-family residence and garage on the land in order to expand onto the neighboring San Gabriel Cemetery property. The entitlements that would be required for this project would be a general plan amendment, zone change, zone text amendment for the San Gabriel Municipal Code, Chapter 94, which is titled Cemeteries, to identify this portion of land to also serve as a cemetery, as well as a lot line adjustment. And this will conclude staff's presentation. Staff just recommends that the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission provide comments to staff and to the applicant team regarding the project. Staff is available for any questions, but at this time we also have the applicant's presentation that the applicant can provide. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if staff can also briefly add, tonight is not a deliberation item. It is just to provide any comments and feedbacks and not to make any determination on what's being presented.
I was actually just checking that. Thank you.
Thank you. Am I live? Yes. Good evening. My name's Bill Jameson. I'm a third generation Pasadena resident, and I am a volunteer board member at the San Gabriel Cemetery. Funny story, I found myself on the board. My father, who was on the board for 20 years, invited me to breakfast. And I arrived at breakfast, and there were two gentlemen there who I'd never met before. And when breakfast was over, I was a board member. And that was 20 years ago. My great-grandfather is buried at the cemetery, my grandfather, my father. We've got quite a history with my family in the cemetery. And very thankful that you're taking the time to hear from us tonight. In short, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about who we are and what it is we want to do with the property that we acquired at 607 Roses Road. It's funny, Andrew here right before us, I wanted to grab him before he left because I want to make sure that he knows he's invited and encouraged to come on the cemetery property. I'm worried that he might feel it's not accessible to his surveyors. I certainly think that an institution that's been in the city of San Gabriel since 1872 is historic and should have its place in the survey that Andrew's conducting. Ironically, this year is 150th anniversary that we're celebrating. I'd like to emphasize that even though the Church of Our Savior, which is Episcopalian church, is our neighbor, we are non-denominational. We serve all faiths. We are also nonprofit. This is not a commercial operation. For those of you who've been on the property, it's a humble operation. We have a volunteer board, and the property, which you can see pictured here, is one that we try and maintain almost like a park, I think would be the best description. It is inviting, peaceful, quiet, and as you can see from this shot, is located in a quiet neighborhood in San Gabriel. You can see the San Gabriel Country Club in the middle there. We're up to the left, that upside down L, and as you zero in, you can get a better idea. The gray shaded property is church property, and the green is the cemetery property, and the green, the narrow rectangular green square is the 607 property. And you can tell by the gray that our neighbors on either side of 607 are the neighbor that the cemetery has had since its inception back in 1872, and that's the church. So the church owns the property on either side of 607, and the idea is to convert 607 into neighboring cemetery property similar to the neighboring cemetery property that has existed next to the church since its inception. So as you get in closer, here you can see the 607 property is set up in a way where the house is set back quite a distance from the street. In fact, it's rather difficult to see the house from the street. Similarly, our house that was built in the 1870s and then moved to its current location in the 1890s, so before the house on 607 was built, our caretaker's house is also impossible to see from the street, and is the first thing that people see when they come in to the San Gabriel Cemetery. I like to say that house sets the tone. We've recently renovated that house, and we have also committed to changing out all the sprinklers in the cemetery to improve water efficiency and at the same time green up the grass. So, what is it that we want to do? Right now, this is the entrance to both the church and the cemetery off Roses. To the right of that driveway is church property. To the left of that driveway is also church property. That wall to the left continues to the 607 property. And what we would like to do is create a wall on 607 that carries that flagstone look across the front of the 607 property. We would eliminate the driveway and again extend that lawn so that as people drove past, they would see, and I'll back up a sec, the sign that's underneath that olive tree there on the left. Even though it's church property, the church has allowed us to post a cemetery sign on that wall right there. So it would be a continuation of that, what I'll call cemetery wall, over onto the 607 property. So there's a shot up the driveway on 607. Our wall would be in front of all of the mature trees, and we would keep all of the mature trees, both oak and pine, on the property, because one of the things that we like in developing other parts of the cemetery is to have plenty of shade. So the mature trees would stay. So there's a closer shot of the sign on the wall that I mentioned to the left of the driveway. I think it's fairly easy to get a visualization of what it is we want to do here across the front of that property, and to put it onto a less picturesque map. The rectangular box is what we would convert into cemetery property from its current status. We would, as you can see, keep the trees and then build a wall on the Roses Road side of the property. To finish up my comments, just some quick shots of the house that was built, I believe, in the 1930s. Here it is from the driveway. This is from the cemetery side, so this is the back of the house that faces our property. I think that's the side of the house. Some shots from the inside. It's in need of some repair, to say the least. So, the San Gabriel Cemetery is very interested in comments from the commission. We obviously, as an institution that's been in the city as long as we have been, have a very obvious and deep connection to the city of San Gabriel. We like history, and we want to expand a historic institution onto 607 Roses Road. That concludes my comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jamison. Are there any questions from my fellow commissioners for either Mr. Jamison or staff? Commissioner DeVrent, start with you.
Yeah, I am very familiar with this property. The San Gabriel Cemetery is a place that I visit often, just walking through the peaceful area there. I admit, when I saw a for sale sign go on in front of that property at 607, I was concerned, and then when I found out what the proposed plans were going to be, I was a little bit relieved that it was going to be the cemetery, because I think it's a very important part of our community. I think that expanding that as part of the community would be something that the surrounding neighbors would like to see as well. So, you know, looking at the plans, I think it preserves the natural, you know, the natural architecture that will be there as part of the community, extending with the church, making it part of the church by extending that wall. Sorry about that. You know, a couple of things I could see here. It's set back. That wall would be set back from Roses Road. Is that correct?
Correct.
So okay.
Correct.
And then, so I understand the side that's facing, so it would be the west side that faces the existing home there, is a wrought iron fence that's going to have ivy on it. Is that correct?
I think we may have to use some different material based on city code, but we intend to use the wrought iron like as uniform for that period of
Okay.
Yeah.
And that, oh, sorry.
And Commissioner, I would just add the wrought iron look that you probably see when you walk the cemetery between the current church property and cemetery is exactly the same type of look that we'd be looking to establish on the new property.
Okay. And I think from a historical commission's point of view, I read through the documentation on the research of the home. Our concern would be, of course, that home didn't have a significant historical value, before demolition happened or anything like that. And from reading the report, I didn't see anything like that. So I know we're not here to comment on the, whether this goes through or whatever it is, but I think that would be our biggest concern on that, as well as the development of the new proposal here is in line with, with what the community is now, and doesn't change the face of that community. So I think this is, those would be the areas that I would like to see maintained and everything, to keep that part of the community. And I know for a fact that you almost don't know the cemetery is there from, going from Roses Road. It's kind of a hidden treasure back there. So that's it for me. I don't really see anything, that's glaring on this that would alert me, other than just the neighboring homes and how that in the future would be affected by that. I know that there's a house to the east that's owned by the church, and then the next home is as well, and I think that they're occupied by people who are from the church right now. So in the future, that those are how that fits in with that as well. So, and I think that this covers it for sure. So again, that's really all I have to say on it, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Urena?
I appreciated the fluidity that you're going to have, right? The continuation of the wall to make it look all uniform. The only thing, me not being very familiar with the property that's already there, I was just a little more on the fence, considering you being of much older history there in that community, kind of absorbing the newer history that was built afterwards. Mm-hmm. I understand the house isn't very visible from the street, but I don't know. I was kind of, like I said, on the fence about completely removing the home that's there, considering it's much smaller significance in history than your property. Still, to me, it's like a little of what we're kind of having to process, since we're trying to help conserve some of the history that's already here. I just, that's basically my comment.
Yeah. Thank you. Vice Chair Maharo?
That was a great presentation, by the way. Thank you. I agree with Commissioner DeVrine. I was also a little concerned when that property was sold. And my fear was someone would come in and build a home that would not match that neighborhood. And because it is an older home, I knew it was in disrepair, to say the least, because I live very, very close proximity to this property. But I know that the cemetery is well maintained. You do, you said your volunteers, you do a great job of maintaining it. I also take walks there. My son learned how to ride a bike in the church parking lot. I have a question. I do love the fluidity also, that you will have that stone wall, because honestly, when you're on Roses Road, it's a beautiful property. It's well maintained. It adds value to our homes in that neighborhood. My question is, and you may not even have an answer yet, with that property, would you keep it a burial ground as is shown there, or would there be a structure mausoleum eventually? Would it be seen from the street? Is there a plan for that yet?
There's not a firm plan. Let me answer one of your questions that was in the middle of the comment. The view from the street, at least our hope, is the wall with trees and shrubbery, similar to the look that you get when you look at the church property next door. So you will not look kind of over the wall from the street and say, oh, that's cemetery. You see the sign, but the wall will be at a height where people will not be able to see in. There is discussion, for sure, about using the cemetery side of the wall for ash memorials, things like that, in the wall. As far as structures that might be built on that property that you could see from the Roses Road side of the wall, that is not the plan. I mean, if that's where your question was headed, is there going to be a large building or something that you would see from the street? Of all the plans I've seen, Todd, I haven't seen any that contemplate that. And
Columbarium's A-ground is
yeah,
the highest would be like 6 foot high. 6 foot high would be the highest.
6 foot high would be the highest. Is Todd Sexton is the cemetery manager. He lives in that house there that you saw pictured. Let me add a point of emphasis. We have developed 2 areas at the cemetery over the last 20 years, and they're both fairly high-end properties. They're bigger spaces. They're what we call family estate lots. The idea would be to dedicate a lot of this new space to those high-end family estate lots. We have a lot of mausoleum space already today available, so we don't need more mausoleum space.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for answering that. And I do see as I walk in that cemetery that you are running out of space. So yeah, this is understandable. I think it's a very nice plan. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So thank you again also for coming to our commission and making this presentation tonight. I think all of us had our eyes on the property when it went up for sale. I read this really as sort of a Habs hair document, that you're documenting a structure that's going to be demolished, and I was glad in your presentation that there were pictures of the interior. In our binder that wasn't included, because I think that the interior certainly speaks to a way that people used to live that may not be the way that we build houses and live today. So I guess my request would be that in the full report that those pictures also be included, just as a record of the space. I am also glad for the overlap that Andrew is still here, and I hope that you do connect around the historic survey. I think that I would hope you would also consider designation, formalizing the historic status of the cemetery. It would be very lovely to be able to bring that into the fold of recognized and designated historic spaces in the city of San Gabriel. And I think to the point that Commissioner Urena was making, infill is part of what happens in cities. And I would agree that given the worst imaginings of what we thought might happen when the property went up for sale, this is a really lovely project to see come in, the extension, and I think it certainly maintains the character of the neighborhood in a really lovely way. So I'm grateful for the presentation tonight. I enjoyed reading the historic records report, and just feel a little bit sad that we learned so much about a building before it's gone. And I think that part of the survey is hopefully going to correct that. But I'm grateful to have learned more about the owners and builders and people who contributed to that space, and look forward to seeing it continue on in the city.
Yep.
So, were there any public comments on this item?
No, Madam Chair, there are no public comments for this item.
All right, then at 7:59, the time for public comment on this item is now closed. Are there any other comments from my fellow commissioners?
Yeah, just sort of for Commissioner Urena's comments about the house and being torn down. I would probably hazard a guess that anybody who took over that property was probably going to demolish it in the first place. And we're just kind of lucky as a city that something that's already historical is kind of taking it over, and it's not going to be it's not something that's going to be coming to this commission as a house that maybe is not appropriate for the neighborhood. So, I think that was probably, whoever would have come in to do that was probably going to do the same thing. So I think this is an extension of a historical area of our community. Is great. I was glad to hear that the columbariums were going to be kind of more lower, and it's not something that was going to be seen from Roses Road. I think that might be somewhat of an issue that would maybe say, hey, there's a cemetery there, and that those would, if there was, it was higher, be towards the back, so you might not see it or be part of that. So I just wanted to make that comment just because I know it was a concern, and I don't think that would be the case, or would have been. It was going to be an issue no matter what, So.
Thank you. I'll also just say it was nice seeing our historic context statement used. Like, this is the first time we've gotten to see references to our historic context statement. So thank you. All right, that brings us to item 6, certified local government CLG application update in the proposed zone text amendment for cleanup items to be historic preservation and cultural to the historic preservation and cultural resource ordinance. And we get to hear from.
Thank you, Chair Lubicic and members of the commission. This one falls to me to provide an update. I'm happy to do so. The CLG application status continues to be pending. We are working still on the only issue that is a barricade to being certified as a local government, and that is revisions to the ordinance. These revisions were requested, if you recall, by the National Park Service. When they did our initial review, and this is with recommendation from the Office of Historic Preservation, which is the state office there, recommending approval for our CLG. When the National Park Service did undergo their review, they raised concerns about our ordinance requesting greater separation between federal and local and state regulations. So I am the one that's working with OHP on these revisions. We've been at it a number of months. There are some challenges, of course, with state staff being quite overburdened with their workload, a lot of out-of-town trips for conferences and things like that, not to mention 2 bouts of COVID for myself since that began, and even our National Park Service reviewer retired, and so we have a new one. So there's been a lot of issues. However, we seized upon a much more efficient approach in about June. We're taking this, rather than looking at the whole ordinance, taking it more section by section, and we're finding that in these small bites, it's much more manageable to review and come to some conclusions about what the revisions or the recommended revisions should be. So we're working our way through the ordinance in that fashion. And we are separating the comments and recommendations for revisions into required, which we feel would be required for the National Park Service to certify us, and then recommended. While we're going through this effort, if we're seeing other things that we want to make a recommendation to the city, which would improve the ordinance in some way, streamline it, we're making those recommended revision changes. So we have completed, we're up to section 153.614. Not sure if you're totally familiar with that section, but it's quite meaty, and that one is taking a bit of time to get through. So that's roughly halfway through the ordinance. However, the remaining sections that we have, we don't need to review and revise all of them. We don't have comments on all of them. We have comments about maybe half or so of what's left in the balance of the ordinance. So I would say we're approximately 70 or 75% finished with the review and revision effort. So the next steps, obviously we're going to complete that review in the fashion that I've described. Then we'll review that with staff and fine-tune those revisions. We want to send that to the National Park Service as a preliminary review because it's essentially a response to comments at this point from National Park Service, just to get their feedback so that we are not moving forward with the revision process to the Commission and to City Council, and then we present something to National Park Service that isn't acceptable or we've missed something. So that's a great preliminary step. The previous reviewer was willing to do that for us. I'm assuming the current reviewer will be as well. Once we go to that step, staff will be bringing that through the ordinance revision process, which I know will include you as a commission, and then complete the CLG process. And I'm sure once we get to that point, it'll really be a matter of just checking the box. We will have done everything up to that point. It's the only thing really stalling it. So in terms of timeline on when I think this could be accomplished, my hope, I think a good effort will get us through the revisions with OHP by the end of the year. A great effort will get us also to the connection with staff, the staff review, and fine-tuning of those revisions and back in the hands of the National Park Service by the end of the year, and that's my hope. For sure, I think we can get to the first step. I'm hoping we'll have time to get through to that point. That concludes my update. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner DeVrent, any questions or comments?
No questions for me, thank you.
Commissioner Urena?
No, no comments. Thank you.
Vice Chair Moharo?
Thank you for your hard work. Thank you. No comment.
In terms of, first I'm kind of laughing because this has been such a long process. I think we submitted our application in winter 2018. Am I remembering correctly? So we're going into 4 solid years of this work. In terms of the types of revisions, I understand that it's to create distance in terms of the designation process, but I feel a little put out that it sounds like there are so many throughout the ordinance itself. And so beyond just that distance, what are the other types of revisions that you're seeing?
Yes, and it's really not a reflection on any deficiency really in our ordinance, I wouldn't say at all. Actually, since 2018, the National Park Service has encountered concerns and issues with other states, with certifying other states, and running afoul, in terms of federal responsibilities under federal regulations being confused with responsibilities under local and state regulations. And so there's a much more magnified attention on this. So I think it's a matter of bad timing, on our part, that, this came before the National Park Service at this time, on the one hand. On the other hand, it certainly does give us an opportunity to really, improve the ordinance so that there are no ambiguities, and I think that will be very helpful, not only for staff but for the public as well. So it's hard to think of a specific example. Something that might be recommended would be very, very simple. Maybe we noticed a particular definition says one thing in one area, but it's used in a different way in another area, and it's not substantive, but we're recommending a word change or something like that just to make it more clear. So these would be very minor. Really, the crux of it in a substantive way is separating CEQA, which is our state law, with the requirements and requirements of the Commission and our Historic Preservation Program under federal law for the purposes of our certification as a CLG. So that's really important to make that distinction because certainly the National Park Service would not want to impose a federal level regulation to an applicant when, they don't want to take responsibility for like a state level regulation when it's not part of the federal regulation. So it's really the crux of it, and that's why we are a bit pausing a bit at the section 153.614, because that really gets into CEQA at that stage. So that one might realize a lot more revision than the other sections, but they really are, once we've gotten to writing those revisions, they really are quite simple and straightforward. It's just a matter of making those adjustments. So.
Thank you. That was helpful for understanding, and I do also appreciate the work very much. It is the double whammy of changes at the federal level and COVID. There's unlucky timing. We hit the jackpot on that one. Were there any public comments on this item?
No, Madam Chair, not for this item.
All right, so it is now 8:09, and time for public comment on this item is now closed. Any further comments or questions from my fellow commissioners? All right, so then that brings us to item 7, staff items.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the commission, for staff items, if Jen doesn't mind that I put her on the spot, again, we had talked about maybe providing an update on the Mission Playhouse painting project.
Yes, again, Jen Vermillion here, City Architectural Historian. Happy to provide a report and update on this. It was about this time last year that a project really coalesced. We had some varied aspects of restoration needs at the Mission Playhouse, and due to budgetary limitations, also some very practical reasons of why we would approach one task over another, and some complexities of some of the other tasks that needed to be done. The results of the paint analysis were reviewed, and it was decided that we'd move forward with that facade paint improvement project. That was brought to you as a commission on August 25th of last year. You're able to see the results of that paint analysis in the rendering that had been provided by LeGrand Studios, Evan Wilson, the artist. We felt that there was an opportunity to embellish a bit the facade in a very simple and reversible way. Paint is one of the most simple ways that a property can be improved that's reversible under the Secretary of the Interior standards. It's very, very low impact. And the Playhouse really did desire to add a visual distinction from the San Gabriel Mission and highlight the entry to the Playhouse, because that was somewhat hard to identify for theater goers and visitors. So we found opportunity in the shallow plaster reveals on the exterior of that entry portico. And then improvements on, embellishments, I should say, on the crest and botanical relief were not quite well envisioned at that time, but we wanted to do something and we weren't really sure what. The paint analysis, unfortunately, showed some inappropriate polychromatic design that we think was applied sometime after original construction, and it really wasn't period appropriate. So we certainly didn't want to repeat that just going off of the paint analysis results. So since that time, the artist worked with their renderings, their colors. They were fine-tuning budget, the glazing techniques, schedule. We met several times as staff. I'm sure that the Playhouse staff met many more times. And in early 2022, we were working that out. July 2022, we had mock-ups available for your view. We were all invited to view those, and we as staff, Sam Toasart and I went on August 2nd to view the in-progress mock-ups. Now, this was a mock-up that was actually on the physical building. Sometimes that's the only way to do it. Other times they're separate samples. We discussed all the aspects with the applicant right on site while viewing that physical mock-up, and we did at that time give a little bit of feedback to the artist and decided that some subtle shadowing and highlight on the crest would be appropriate in the same color scheme that he was using, which were muted ambers and creams, just to subtly bring out these details. And the project was complete on August 12th, 2022. And it's very pleasing, very in keeping with the watercolor rendering that you saw last year. And I hope you've had an opportunity to view it yourselves. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? No? All right. Thank you very much for the update. Are there any other staff items?
Not at this time, Madam Chair.
All right, then that brings us to item 8, Commissioner comments and conference meeting reports. Each commissioner may address the commission on matters of general information and or concern. This is also the time for commissioners to report on conferences and or meetings that they have attended. Commissioner DeVrent, start with you.
I have nothing at this time.
All right. Commissioner Urena?
No questions, concerns, or anything to report at this time.
Vice Chair Mojaro?
Nothing to report. Thank you.
Well, I think it's certainly worth acknowledging the award from the LA Conservancy for the historic context statement. That is a really wonderful thing to to be recognized for, and it's certainly wonderful for the city. I had a chance to connect with staff at the LA Conservancy around the awards ceremony and do a little video recording talking about the process from the perspective of being a commissioner, and was very happy to point out that our context statement actually gives a fuller context to the First Peoples rather than just an introduction. Talked about some of the attention given to the barrio and those areas that we know are so important to our community. So that was a really nice opportunity to connect with the LA Conservancy around. I also just wanted to make everyone aware, and I don't know if there's a possibility for support from the city on this, but the California Preservation Foundation has a planner and commissioner boot camp 3-part series that they're doing online. There are 3 dates scheduled. They're Thursdays. Looking to see, the training runs from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. on Thursday, September 22nd, so coming up very soon, and then November 3rd and 10th. But it might be a really wonderful way to gain some more experience in our various roles. So I wanted to bring that to attention. I also wanted to inquire if we could get an update about the work that's being done on the property that sits on the wedge intersections between Pearl and Mission. I didn't grab the street number. It's a very interesting building because it's triangular. It's always been sort of a green stucco, and recently the stucco's been removed, revealing the brick underneath. And it's really striking. I would be very curious to know what's planned there. My first panic when I saw things being removed was they're taking it down, and then when I saw they were just taking the stucco off and revealing the materials underneath, it just was really fun to see, and I would like to know a little bit more about what's happening there, because it is a really distinct and unique building in the city. I know from residents of the area that early on that was sort of envisioned as a commercial corridor, and so it's a building that sort of sets the tone as people continue down Mission on towards La Casa. And then the other thing I wanted to raise to staff was just a concern around the scheduling of our meetings. I would really like to strive to make sure that we're meeting the quarterly meetings as they're set out in the ordinance. While we don't have large public attendance, I think particularly as the survey is underway, if we're not meeting at our regular time, the months that are posted on the city website, people don't necessarily know how to find us. And if ever there's, when we meet, we have these incredibly robust and very full agendas. But I also have lots of things that I would love to bring that I think we can bring. So if there's ever a need for topics, call me. I've got a long list. And I think some of that is just even the opportunity for us to create subcommittees or task forces for the things that we'd like to work on. There could be a lot of opportunity for us to connect with members of the community around districts like the barrio, and to work on doing some of that process, houses or structures that we see that are important. I think we're missing opportunities to really serve our community when we're not meeting as the meetings are called out in the ordinance. So that is my report for the evening. Anything from my fellow commissioners?
My only question was that the building that you had mentioned, is that off from San Gabriel Boulevard? I think I saw it and it stuck out to me. Like, I've never seen that building before. So
it looks entirely new. If you're driving east on Mission coming from Del Mar, it was sort of a lime olive green, a very odd green covered. It has an awning that stands off the front. I had looked up the date of its construction. I think it dates back to the 1920s at some point, and I'm sorry that I don't have the street number. But it's a building that sort of leads you down to La Casa if you stay on Mission. Okay. So it's west of La Casa. Okay. But it's really, to see the materials underneath, really gives a whole different character to the street. Yep. And I've been very curious about what the project is. Any other comments? All right, well, that brings us to adjournment. So I will adjourn the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource meeting at 8:18 to the regular meeting of the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission on December 14th, 2022 at 6:30 p.m., happily at City Hall and not on Zoom. And thank everyone for their time tonight and work. Thank you.